Greetings, everyone. Welcome, welcome. Thanks for joining. My name is Chris White, also here with Tom, and welcome. This is a kind of free preview class of what a Blueprint Live class would be like. So welcome. We're basically just doing lesson one, not the entire thing because it's not the same length as a normal lesson, but a good chunk of it. So welcome, everybody. Most people are pretty familiar with Zoom these days, but you should be able to see a chat box. And in that chat box, Tom's already talking to you, and he's asking you to make sure you change your setting to all panelists and attendees. We really like that because it makes it super interactive, and we can all hear each other talk, and it makes for a good experience. So welcome. We're excited you're here. Welcome, everybody. Just a quick introduction to myself. My name is Chris. I took the LSAT way back in 2002, a long time ago, went to law school, became a lawyer. I did litigation defense work for law firms for many years. And then when my wife and I had our second child, she was pretty ready to kind of restart her career. And I was very ready to be not working at law firms anymore. So I stopped. And at first I just did some kind of contract work for attorneys that I met over the years. Got this gig at Blueprint, which I love. I love teaching the LSAT. Super enjoyable. Plus, it gives me the flexibility to kind of be there with my kids more often. So it's a win-win situation. So I've been teaching this class quite a while. I love teaching it. So I'm happy to be here. And we are all very lucky to have Tom with us today. So Tom, why don't you introduce yourself?
All right. Hey, everyone. My name is Tom. I took the LSAT back in 2014, got a 180. So I'm definitely able to give you all some pretty good advice about how to get your score up. And then I went to grad school for economics. I worked as a data scientist and an economist for a few years. But turns out when you're a data scientist, it's just a lot of you sitting alone in front of your computer. And I am such an extrovert that just did not work for me. So I started off just doing some tutoring and teaching sort of as a side gig so I could get that human interaction. And then I realized that I was just as obsessed with teaching people the LSAT as I had been with studying for and mastering the LSAT. So I just went like whole hog on this and best job I've ever had. So really glad you are all here with us.
Welcome, everybody. As you can see, we have kind of a unique format. We have a two-instructor format with Blueprint. And I think that's one of the biggest selling points. You essentially get kind of two instructors at the price of one. And it's not, two people that don't know what they're doing, two real instructors that really know their stuff, that teach this stuff a lot. And so the benefit of having the two-instructor model is you can always get your questions answered. Some people are asking, like, is this live? Yeah, we're here. Ask us questions, interact. So, the way it works is in this chat box, one of Tom's many roles today will be to answer your questions in that chat box. And sometimes he might bring some stuff to discuss with me, together. And so it makes it really interactive. So you always get your questions answered. And, Tom and I will be discussing things and be able to kind of get into the weeds and get a little more nuanced with the LSAT, which is fun. One thing that you guys won't be able to experience right now is what we call the pre-work. So we assign pre-work that's done before each lesson. And the pre-work allows students to be able to get kind of the basic, fundamentals down, kind of the easier stuff down on their own. And then that way, during a lesson, if students are understanding the basics, we can actually go deeper. This test is really hard. And so it's nice to be able to, have a more detailed, nuanced, deep dive into some tougher things about the LSAT. And so doing the pre-work and then being able to kind of have the instructors and you kind of go into a deeper dive and tougher questions is another kind of nice benefit. Now, we always do like these polls as well to kind of assess how people feel about certain topics. And that kind of like guides how we approach that particular section of the lesson. So if it seems like people are struggling with the topic, we'll start with the basics a little bit. If people are feeling confident, we'll jump right in to do some more difficult questions. So that's kind of a unique thing about the way our live class works as well. Every argument has two essential components to it, right? Or else it's not an argument. Those two essential components are number one, premises, and number two, conclusion, right? Every argument has to have a conclusion. Every argument has to have one or more premises. And it's very important on the LSAT to have a clear distinction between the two. The conclusion is what they're trying to prove with that argument. The premise is what they're using to try to prove it. It is their evidence. It is their support for what they are trying to prove. And so you have to be very, very good at being able to spot the difference. What is the conclusion? What are the premises? And sometimes there's other stuff that's neither of those things thrown into the argument as well. But you got to be able to pull out those essential components. Now, occasionally you'll get arguments with subsidiary conclusions. And so, Tom, what does that mean? That sounds confusing.
Okay. So if a premise, its job was to support the conclusion, and we identified a conclusion because it was something that had support, a subsidiary conclusion does both, right? It has support from a premise, but it in turn goes on to support the main conclusion.
Yeah, so it serves a dual role, a dual function. It is being supported, so it is a conclusion, but it is supporting something else, so it's also a premise. It's essentially doing both things, which also leads to something very, very important, which is the requirements of the conclusion. So to be a conclusion, it has to be, number one, supported. If it ain't supported, it ain't a conclusion. So it has to have some support, and it cannot be supporting anything else. Main conclusions, they're in charge. They're top of the food chain. They don't do any work. They're not working for anybody else. Everybody else is working for them. So to be a main conclusion of an argument, you have to be supported, but not support anything else. Because if you're supported and doing support, then you are a subsidiary conclusion. And that's one of the trickiest things that can happen in argument evaluation, is being able to tell those two things apart. And we're going to do some work today to help you be able to figure out if something is really the main conclusion or if it's a subsidiary conclusion. We got some tricks to help you along the way. Now, an assumption is something that they're actually not saying. Later in the course, you deal with assumptions quite a bit. This early stage, you just need to realize that it's something not being said, but it's something that the author, kind of needs for the argument to work. Don't really need it in this first lesson to understand assumptions very much. But you do need to find a conclusion. And the first thing that we kind of teach to help students find conclusions is to look for indicators. And there's a couple of them on this page right now. So first of all, there's just keyword indicators for conclusions and premises. And so, if you spot any of these keywords, certainly helpful. So if you see a therefore, or a thus, or it follows that, or it suggests that, that means it's a conclusion of some kind. If you see any of these words, since, because, as, that means it's a premise. It's supporting something else, right? They're giving you a reason for what they're gonna conclude. But a bigger one that happens especially in main point or role type questions or reading comp is this idea of what we call like shift words. Pretty common to have argument structure where they say some people claim this, but blam, and they hit you with the conclusion. However, and they hit you with a conclusion. So these kind of author's attitude shifts, these buts, these yets, these howevers, they are also indicators that you might have your conclusion. Now, Tom, are any of these guarantees? If you see a keyword, does it guarantee it's the main conclusion?
Oh no, the LSAT is not kind to test takers. Like, the LSAT is designed to be an incredibly challenging test, and the test makers lay traps for people, right? So they'll have the word thus in a sentence that is very much not the main conclusion, because they're testing, were you going on autopilot here and just looking at keywords, or were you really trying to understand this argument and figure out the conclusion?
Yeah, the things that we give as kind of indicators, nothing is a sure bet. You still have to go back to this. To be the main point, it has to meet those two requirements. It has to be, that's a funny arrow. It has to be supported by something else in the argument, and it cannot be doing any support of its own. It has to meet those requirements, regardless of the keywords. The keywords help, point you in the right direction, but you still got to figure that out. Now, that's not all. Tom, what other things might help us find a conclusion other than just these keywords or these shift words?
So we can see author's attitude, right? So if the person who was writing this statement that we're reading says, like, you should do something, right? They're concluding that it's the best thing to do. This is what you should do. Or they can say that, like, something is like a terrible idea. right? They've got a lot of attitude about that idea, and they'll give us a reason why it would be a terrible idea.
Yeah, very, very common. So just the presence of the author can definitely be an indicator that's probably what they're trying to prove, right? If they're throwing some shade, this is terrible. Or if they're like, this is an amazing development. Author's attitude might be an indicator of conclusions as well. So if you see something that's an expression of opinion, that might be what they're trying to prove. Ask yourself, is it being supported by something else? If so, it's a conclusion. And if it's not supporting anything else, it is your main conclusion. All right, so to practice this, we're going to do some drills before we go on to some real LSAT questions. So I want you guys to read, and we'll kind of, Tom and I will trade off as like who's leading each of these. I want you to first read number 1. Go ahead and read number 1. And what I want you to do is put in the chat box anything that you heard either Tom or I mention as a possible indicator, something that might be pointing to what our conclusion is. So go ahead and read the first one.
So is one of our indicator words, and also should, right? One of those prescriptive statements. Good job, everyone.
Yep. All right, so both of those are really nice indicators. So it's got to be a conclusion of some kind. Should is very often, it's a strong author's opinion, prescriptive statement, what we call them, very likely to be your conclusion, but nothing's a guarantee. So does this line, if you want to stay with your partner, you should probably shop somewhere else, do they give a reason for that somewhere else in the argument? Does it have evidence? Does it have support?
Yep, people saying that IKEA trips are the #1 reason people break up. And I don't know about you, Chris, but I have found shopping at IKEA incredibly stressful. I once made the mistake of going to IKEA on what I didn't know was freshman move-in weekend at the University of Maryland. And there were 15,000 undergrads and their stressed out parents in IKEA. Worst shopping trip of my life.
Yeah, IKEA is rough. If I go to IKEA, maybe I'll grab a meatball and leave. That's about it. Okay, good. Yeah, so nice indicators here. So author's attitude thing with the should, plus it definitely has support. The IKEA fights are the reason. It's their evidence for that thing they're trying to prove, which is probably shop somewhere else. Definitely if you want to stay with your partner. All right, Tom, why don't you walk them through the second drill?
All right, so take a look at the second one. And again, let us know if you see any of those conclusion indicators that we talked about earlier on. All right, so I'm seeing people say to see this is definitely indicating a relationship between these two sentences. Absolutely. And I've seen, yeah, Joelle, you said screwed up colossally was author's opinion. Yeah, definitely an opinion there, an opinion I happen to share. I don't know if the rest of you watch Game of Thrones, but that last season was a total disappointment. And then, yeah, I think that to see this, right, to see that it is that they screwed up colossally, what is our support that they screwed up colossally? Well, consider this other thing. So, yep, that first sentence is going to be our conclusion. And to see this is really our shift between the two, giving us that the second sentence supports the first one.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite kind of indicators is like whenever they say like to see this or after all, it's basically saying, I just told you my claim. Now here's my support for the claim. After all, here's my reason to see this. Here's my reason. So it's a really good indicator. Plus, screwed up colossally is about as strong of an author's attitude as you're going to get. So yeah, for sure, that's what they're trying to prove. They messed up, and the evidence is definitely the information at the end.
And Chris, all right. I think that the other thing that this brings up is that one of those traps the LSAT lays for you is that they don't always put the conclusion as the final sentence, right? Like we're used to writing an essay and the conclusion is always your last paragraph. If you added another paragraph after that, it just wouldn't make sense structurally. But the LSAT knows that we expect the final sentence to be the conclusion. So don't go on autopilot there and think that it always will be, right? Look for those relationship words and look for those other sources of conclusions.
Yeah, that point's good. It's especially true for the argument structure questions. So main point and role, where all they're testing, can you see the argument structure? So yeah, I actually tell my students, just the first sentence alone is an indicator. Always consider it. Maybe it's the first sentence. It's really common that the first sentence is the main point when they're trying to hide it. So yeah, really, really good point. All right, let's put our skills to real life LSAT questions now. This first one, we'll just kind of walk through it together. But first, go ahead and read the question, which we call the prompt. Now, Tom, we cover this in the actual course before this, but we left this part out of it. But I think it's something we should kind of talk about for a second. Why does Blueprint teach to read the question first rather than the fact pattern first, Tom?
Well, because sometimes you read that whole paragraph off to the left and your job is to find a flaw in it. And other times it's to find the role of a particular quote in it. And if you read the whole thing and then read the directions and you realize you were focusing on the wrong thing, and you should go back and reread the whole thing, you just wasted a bunch of time that you don't have. So it makes you faster and it helps you focus on the key element that you're supposed to be focusing on.
Yeah, and you read the fact pattern differently depending on what question type it is. Plain and simple. What am I supposed to do with this information? I need to know ahead of time before I read it. That's why you definitely want to read the question first. All right, now Tom, what are they asking us to do with this question? What's our job here?
Look for the conclusions. We're finding the main point.
Yeah, this one's very, very obvious. Just find the main point. That's it. That's all they're asking us to do. So let's hide the answer choices because the answer choices are not your friends. Instead, let's just figure out what is the main point of this argument first. Once we figure it out, it's going to make the right answer shine like a beacon and make our lives a heck of a lot easier when we do the work ahead of time. Okay, so why don't you guys go ahead and read the stimulus, the fact pattern, and same thing we did with the drills. I want you to say in the chat box, what do you see that might be an indicator of the conclusion? Let us know in the chat box.
All right, seeing a couple things. People saying but, people saying unlikely, people saying for this reason. And I think those are the big three things that we would look at here.
100%, 100%. Now, Tom, when you're reading an argument on the LSAT though, and they start talking for a while, then all of a sudden they throw one of those shifts in there. What does that probably tell you about where the argument is located?
So those shift words, right, are definitely like one of those big flashing indicator words for what you want to focus on. Often it shifts from talking about one thing to a conclusion based on that. Sometimes it doesn't give you a conclusion. It's just like a shift in direction of the argument, but it's definitely telling you focus on this, pay attention to this.
Yeah. And this definitely has that disagreement pattern, right? So when you get the but, the yet, the however, and they're disagreeing with the thing they just said, that clearly means that the thing they just said before it is not your main point, right? Because they disagree with it. So it can't be this. The author disagrees with what it says right there. So that's out, right? When you say but, you mean I don't agree with it. If you don't agree with it, it can't be your conclusion, right? So let's see here. The but is pointing to that maybe being a conclusion. You guys also spotted the unlikely as that maybe being a conclusion. So let's find out. Does it have support? Do they give us a reason why the prediction is unlikely to be borne out? Do they give support for that?
Good. The other factors, absolutely. Yeah, this is that disagreement pattern that we just talked about. Like some people say, right, many early discussions predicted, but something else, here's why, other factors.
Yeah, and we even kind of did a little exercise that sounds like it's probably going to apply here. That's definitely the conclusion, right? We're saying that their prediction is unlikely to be borne out. Okay, we're saying they're wrong, but it's pretty unlikely the right answer is just going to simply say, this prediction is unlikely to be borne out. It doesn't even make much sense just on its own. I want you guys, I think this is a pretty good class. We're just going to go for this for a second. I want you to do what I asked Tom to do earlier. I want you to write in the chat box, flesh out what, add some context to that, make it more of a complete thought. What is this conclusion actually saying? So I'm seeing some pretty good input so far. However, I'm gonna give you guys one giant tip. Whenever a conclusion has some author's attitude, put that author's attitude in, or even like a logical force sort of word, put that in your anticipation. I would expect it to probably be that.
Yeah, right. So logical force is the difference between I might study for the LSAT and I will study for the LSAT. Very different ideas. And the LSAT really, really rewards you for paying attention to that.
Yeah. All right. So I'm gonna pick one. Global warming causing tropical storms. I can't spell. Storms is unlikely to be true. All right. Let's see if we got it. Let's go ahead and put up the answer choices, and I'll put up a poll. So don't pick the answer, say in the chat box. I want people to give a chance to try to find it on their own. So I'm going to show you the answers, and I'm going to launch a poll, see if you can find the winner. All right, so let me show the results so you guys can see. So it is one of the two. It is either B or E. And if I didn't show you that stimulus and I just showed you what I wrote in red, I guarantee you pretty much everyone would just pick E, because that's pretty much exactly what it says. Global warming causing tropical storms is unlikely to be true. Global warming probably will not produce more storms. That's what we wrote ahead of time. So Tom, why do you think B is such a tempting answer choice?
I think because it captures that disagreement here, right? Contrary to early discussions. And we knew that we had a disagreement here. But the fact that there were other factors, right, that we focused on wasn't the end of this argument. Sure, it was the last thing we heard, but it wasn't what this argument was ultimately trying to prove. It said these other factors show that the prediction is unlikely to be borne out.
Yeah, that's exactly the trick, is that they mention other factors, but the other factors isn't the conclusion. The conclusion isn't that there's other factors. The other factors is a premise. Because there's other factors, that's why we think you're wrong. And E is the one that says they're wrong, right? That if you think they're going to have more storms, you're wrong about that. And so that's why it's pretty tricky, but it's bringing in something from the premises, and it's not the fact that they just don't conclude that it's not the only factor affecting it. They're using the other factors to say you're probably wrong about there being more storms. So very tricky answer choice, very, very commonly picked for that. All right. A couple of people had D as well. So Tom, do you want to explain why D isn't our overall conclusion of the argument?
Yeah, I think one thing is it says it will negate the effect. And we're told that it's likely to counteract the effect. So, it's probable that it will oppose it to some degree, but it will definitely completely cancel it out. That comes back to that logical force we were talking about before. It's just stronger than what we heard. And the LSAT really wants you to be precise with the strength of language.
Yeah, and yeah, absolutely right. In addition, what that says, there's no support for that. They don't give a reason for that, so it can't be the conclusion, right? That they're using this idea of instabilities, likely to counteract it as support. Like, how do we know that these instabilities are going to counteract it? They just told us, right? They didn't cite some sort of evidence as to why that's the case. So there's no support for that either. So it can't be your conclusion. All right, very good. So a couple things about this question. Definitely tricky, has a pretty low accuracy. Number one is that I definitely want to get to, that I think this question illustrates really well, especially the difference between the right and the wrong answer. The main point is not a summary of the argument. And I think that's one big misconception, is that, oh, let me just summarize everything they said. No, a conclusion is a finite moment. It is the thing they're trying to prove, right? There's the thing they're trying to prove. That's the conclusion. That's what they're asking for. Then there's the evidence. They're not asking you to summarize the whole thing. What is just the conclusion? Just that one finite thing. And so we had to find an answer choice that said in some way, this prediction is unlikely to be borne out. What prediction? The prediction of more storms, AKA we're not going to have as many storms, or we're probably not going to have more storms. E, right? That is the one that matches the line that we underlined. They're only asking for that line. B is not that line. It is something totally different than that line. And so you have to know that the conclusion is a finite moment. It is the thing they're trying to prove. That's one big thing to get out of this question. The other big thing, I think, is just the idea of, they're not nice with answer choices. And so you have to incorporate information from elsewhere sometimes, but you still have to retain the meaning of the underlying conclusion, right? And so pull it in correctly. They're saying that it's unlikely to be borne out. So it's unlikely that we're going to get more storms, E. Right, so incorporate language from elsewhere to kind of to give the full meaning of what they're saying with that conclusion. All right, good question.